Welcome, everybody, to the study session, November 22nd, 2022 is called to order. Donna, can you do a roll call, please?
I will. Councilmember Bode,
Here.
Councilmember Sherman. Here. Councilmember Gutierrez,
Here.
Mayor Nesco,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Schmidt,
Here.
Councilmember McDowell,
Present.
and Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Just a reminder to everyone, this was a study session, basically a conversation between the council and staff, and there'll be no public comment taken. You're welcome to email any one of us or the city manager, Jeff Knighton, for questions and comments. If this does come back, it will come back as a business item and you'll be able to comment or ask questions. Thank you, everybody. Our first study item is a review of the recommendations from the Homeless Task Force. City Manager Jeff Knighton has details.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of council. Earlier this year, we convened a homelessness task force. We wanted to gather a diverse set of perspectives, everyone from Shelton residents to homelessness advocates and business owners. And we did that, convened that task force in June of this year. The task force held 6 meetings on various topics. And I did want to recognize the task force members that participated in that discussion. They're all listed in your work group. Mayor Nesco, Councilmember Gutierrez, Mason County Commissioner Sharon Trask, who I believe is with us this evening, several members of our police department and members of the business community, Holly Cahoon and Dean Jewett, along with Melanie Bacala, who's here with me this evening. She's going to present some of the perspectives of the task force and what the discussion was like over those 6 meetings. So again, we met 6 times and facilitated that discussion focused on learning about the Boise decision. That's a federal level decision that affects this issue, along with the Blake decision that affects us here in Washington State. We concluded the task force on October 11th. The same night we had the Spotlight Shelton event that was focused on this very topic and presented these recommendations to the community and talked a little bit about that, along with giving some personal stories about how the issue affects us here in the community in various departments, along with fire department, police department, our public works and parks departments and everything else. But tonight we have for your discussion 7 of the recommendations that were formally voted on by the task force as recommendations that they wanted to present to you for your consideration. So the first one was a mitigation site, and I'll ask Melanie to talk a little bit about that and how that discussion evolved from the task force.
Yes. Well, as you know, most communities have been struggling with how to help our homeless, how to serve them and help them get back on with their lives. And so as we looked at the mitigation site, the reality is that we have a population of homeless folks that are in our downtown core who aren't necessarily amenable to the services that we currently have. And without a way, as we all know with the Boise decision, if we don't have a place to say, well, if you don't want to go here, then you have to go here. And that's really, as a group, what led us to the mitigation side. It wasn't a unanimous recommendation, but it had the majority of members there who we did raise our hand to say to put it on that list. And I just want to reiterate, it was a really good mix of people on this committee. Everyone, we had really good conversation and discourse, even though we might have differing opinions. And so again, this wasn't unanimous, but it was the majority.
Yeah. So the mitigation site, as proposed, one of the quotes that I put in your packet here that are encampments are places where a group of individuals experiencing homelessness reside that is not intended for long-term continuous occupancy. Sanctioning encampments is not an alternative to providing services and permanent housing, but can ameliorate the conditions of living on the streets. So this was one of the recommendations the task force provided. We also looked at several other models around the state, including one of the ones that we adopted, chapter 20.47, that was directly related to camping on private property, and provided those encampments from a community group for no longer than 7 months. Now, if this is a recommendation that council wanted to move forward with, we would need to change that language a little bit, but not a whole lot. We provided several sections of code from other cities who have implemented this emergency encampment piece as reference points for you to take a look at as you're considering this option. Let's see, the other one was, there's an element of this element of the mitigation site called a safe parking area, and the city of Vancouver has adopted an ordinance directly related to that I also provided a copy to you to take a look at. So that was the first one, and please, at any time, if you have any questions, let me know. But I'm looking forward to your discussion at the end of the presentation of all these options, or all these recommendations, rather. The second recommendation was support for grant applications by our nonprofit community partners to increase the availability of shelter beds. Little discussion about that. Generally, that is just the city writing a letter of support for those grants. And if Melanie had anything that she'd like to add on that part.
I think the only part is we know there is a lot of money out there from state, from federal, and the importance of not only the city working with these organizations, but the organizations working together in tandem. Because if we do that, we're really going to make headway on this.
The third recommendation is for one or two Mason County and City of Shelton focused designated crisis responders, or DCRs, you'll hear them referred to as, potentially embedded with our police department. The designated crisis responder is a unique key in Washington State's crisis mental health system. The Involuntary Treatment Act, designed in the 1970s, so it's been a while, appoints them as the gatekeepers, and they are the only people authorized in Washington State to involuntarily detain someone that is experiencing a mental health crisis. We looked at the salaries of DCRs in the state, and the numbers you have there in front of you do not include the benefits package. So typically another third on top of what that salary cost is. There are other positions that various cities have used, including navigators, host teams, that type of thing. But the DCR was the recommendation that came out of the Homelessness Task Force. And as you all know, we have applied for a grant with the Association of Washington Cities and the Washington State Healthcare Authority to provide funding to support a DCR that is embedded with our police department. That doesn't necessarily mean that that individual would ride in a police car with those individuals, with the police officer, but they would have the ability to respond quickly. Currently, the closest DCR is located in Lacey, and that hampers our response time significantly. So that was one of the reasons that that recommendation was made by the task force.
And we heard stories from folks on the committee about they have somebody in mental health crisis, they call the DCR, but you can't detain them. And they're gone by the time the DCR gets here from Lacey. And, you know, we all know mental health is just, it's a really big issue. The funding's coming back for it. And I think it's just, that's going to be a real big key to our efforts, is helping some of these folks with their mental health issues.
So we expect to have information on the grant early next week. The fourth recommendation was from the task force was storage lockers that are co-located with a potential mitigation site. And what this is intended to do is address some of the piles of personal belongings that we see sometimes in our streets, particularly the people that are using their shopping carts. And what we found through this process is that if you provide people with a safe place for them to store their belongings, they don't feel the need to keep their belongings with them at all times. The city of Portland initiated a program This does have a cost associated with it because you have to be able to staff those storage lockers and allow people access to their belongings when they have them stored within those mitigation lockers. For the city of Portland, and this is kind of the only data point I found that I wanted to share with you, $50,000 to create the storage lockers, and then $120,000 a year for the employees to keep it open from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. 5 days per week. And that's kind of what the storage lockers were intended to address. Melanie, do you have any comments on that one?
The only comment is, there's been a lot of talk about the shopping carts and what to do with them. And this is a good first step to that. It doesn't mean there won't, couldn't potentially be a shopping cart ordinance down the line, but in terms of what because I want to reiterate, Jeff did a phenomenal job leading this group. As you can imagine, it could have been, it wasn't an easy thing to herd our group of cats. And one of the things, he had a very specific process and everyone knew. And so once everyone had a meeting to bring everything forward so we could research it. And then the last meeting was, okay, what are we going to recommend? And so, there were some things that came up at the last meeting that weren't on that initial list. And so sticking to the process. So this by no means is an exhaustive list, but we think it's not going to fix the shopping cart issue, but I think it's going to help it. And it's one step.
And I did actually, I apologize. I did want to go back to the first item, the mitigation site. We think that we can develop a mitigation site for approximately $35,000. However, staffing that mitigation site, because you don't want an unhosted mitigation site. We've seen examples of that in the city of Longview, and it turned out extremely poorly. And we don't want to repeat that mistake. We make our own new mistakes, right? So the cost ongoing for staff members to staff at least overnight, the mitigation site would be in the neighborhood of 100,000 for over the evening hours. Jumping back, the next recommendation from the task force was public dashboards to track metrics related to homelessness. And there's several examples of those. The State Department of Social and Health Services run several of those dashboards. We found examples in Snohomish County, in Spokane County that track metrics related to this issue. The task force thought that the best use of those public dashboards for our community was tracking the number of available homeless beds, shelter beds that are available to those folks on a daily basis, along with what was the next set? Oh, and that would supplement the annual point in time count. The point in time count is a federal requirement that we do every January, except last year, I think we did it in February due to COVID. But it would supplement that and give us more accurate, up-to-date information on a daily or weekly basis to tell whether our programs are working or not. And we can track those data points and see whether we're having an effect or maybe we need to do something else. Melanie, do you have anything to add on that one?
No.
And the last one was affordable housing. So this has been a topic in our community for quite a while, and affordable housing, creating the opportunity for that affordable housing is something that we have worked on and will continue to work on. And there really are only two ways to create affordable housing. One is with new subdivision applications, you require an affordable housing component as a percentage of the subdivision. But with that, you give a density bonus. So you can create additional lots within the same subdivision, but those lots have to be affordable. We've talked a little bit about this, and we're currently working on a draft ordinance to do this that will be presented to you middle of next year, probably, for your consideration and discussion. That's one way. The other way is by a public-private partnership with a housing developer, wherein the city either sells the land to that developer or at a discount generally, because you receive a public benefit out of it, which is the affordable housing component, or we lease or some other financial arrangement for the land that the city owns to be developed. So those are really the two options. A couple other things that we can do and that we are actually in the middle of on this portion of it is updating the housing element in our comprehensive plan, which we will do as part of the comprehensive plan update that we're required to do under the Growth Management Act. Perform a housing needs assessment, which the county's Mason County has done, and we participated in that effort. Creating an affordable housing action plan, which is really focused on those two things that I mentioned before, either requiring through a density bonus on the subdivision ordinance or selling or leasing land to a developer. Funding equitable housing development, which is another form of public-private partnership, developing eviction diversion programs, which I know already exist in our community through our nonprofit partnerships, and collaborating with housing authorities and local nonprofit housing developers, which is much the same as what I mentioned before. I did have all the sources for the information that I received as part of this packet. And that was the last recommendation of the task force as a whole. Melanie, do you have anything to add on the affordable
I think you
housing?
covered that well.
And that's all. I'm happy to answer any questions or listen to your discussion about these options.
Comments or questions for staff? Deputy Mayor.
Couple maybe clarifying questions. Have we talked shopping carts? That's been on my list for a while. Have we talked to Walmart, Fred Meyer, Safeway? Where are they at with the shopping cart issue?
We haven't. We were focused on the task force recommendations, which was the storage lockers. If that's something council would like us to do, we can certainly do that.
Seeing as how it's a loss prevention type of an issue, I would be willing to ask them for financial support for that solution, seeing as how that should help with their loss. Can I keep going, or do you guys want to jump in? Found it interesting that the mitigation site made it on the list. A couple of years ago, we pitched this and it went over poorly. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what has changed? What changed the minds of the folks on the committee?
Yeah, I think Melanie can speak to this probably better than I can, but several of the people that were opposed to that mitigation site in, what was it, 2019 or early 2020? It's hard to remember pre-COVID, but several of the people that were adamantly opposed to that after they heard the information and the discussion of, I believe, our second task force meeting ended up in favor of that approach. So
I think part of it was taking time for education. I think part of it was the location. And I think you're going to have that no matter where we put it. But I do think having these dialogues and having the people at the table, some of the people at the table who have had concerns about it, they really, once they learned more about it, realized our goal is to get the disruption at least out of the core. And I don't mean downtown, but out of the place where people are hanging out.
Was a location suggested from the committee?
No.
No.
And what I told the committee, and all these were videotaped, you can view all of the meetings on our YouTube channel. What I told the committee is no matter what location you pick, there will be opposition to it. And it doesn't really matter where it is. So that's, and we have several locations. I think I identified 5 and there may be more. And we can talk about a location if the council decides to move forward with this option.
I have a question on the mitigation site as well. Do people have to be sober to go into the mitigation site?
That we didn't
Or
get.
do we not have rules yet? You're not there, you're just proposing a mitigation site.
And yeah, and I think it's a lot of looking at what other jurisdictions are doing
Mhm.
and what's working. And there are communities using these and having success.
And then is that a satisfactory location for people to have to go? Like with the Boise things, if you're sleeping in someone's doorway, can we say you have to go to the mitigation site? And is that an option that you can say, no, I don't want to go, and then we just have to leave them there?
No, that is, my understanding is that is an acceptable alternative under the Boise decision.
I have two questions. Number one is I'm trying to visualize what a mitigation site exactly looks like. If it's only $35,000 to get this kicked off, I can't imagine it's massive, or what does that look like?
So my ideal solution would be this, it would be a campsite, basically, for people to locate their tents. The ideally, long-term, the same site would transform into a brick and mortar facility, but that is adding several zeros to the number that we would need to develop it. And in order to provide a interim solution that would impact the problem now, that this temporary site would be that solution.
And then my second part, can I ask that? Okay, so my second part to that is if somebody becomes disruptive, they're making it an unsafe environment, what do we do with them then? Because then,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it's similar to the rules that several of our shelters have now. If you are a convicted sex offender, for instance, we're not required to find a place to house you. And or if you break the rules that are established, you can be booted from the camp.
and then at that point, if they're booted
Mhm.
and then they go and sleep on the streets again,
Yep.
what happens to them at that point?
That's would not be an option. We can still take enforcement action at that point. It's very similar to the chapter 20.47 that the council adopted earlier this year that kind of lays out that framework. And we can make that language more robust if the council desires we go that way.
Comments? Questions?
Can you talk about the public dashboard? Who's gonna be using that and what's the
Yeah.
purpose?
So currently, our police department calls our nonprofit shelter community partners daily to determine the number of beds that are available. The public dashboard would basically take that away and allow anyone in the public to see what's available. And if there are no beds available, why we can't take enforcement action at a certain point. The important thing, I think, in my mind, is that we can see if what we're doing is having an impact. And if it's not, then we can change what we're doing to something that might have an impact.
Councilmember.
Curious as how would we know that that dashboard is accurate?
That would be the city's responsibility, that we would make sure that dashboard is maintained on a daily basis. Other than the fact that we would guarantee its accuracy as the city, other than calling around yourself or a member of the public calling around themselves to each of the nonprofit providers. I think relying on the accuracy and factual data that the city provides is something that's our responsibility.
Something like that doesn't already exist for the nonprofits, though.
It does at the state level.
Right.
Department of Social and Health Services does maintain it now. Whether they are boots on the ground here in Mason County, that's a different story. It's very similar to the DCR that's located in Lacey. They may be close, but they don't know our community on a daily basis the way we do.
Would that be the coordinated entry?
Part of it, we would absolutely track those resource availabilities, but there are other nonprofit providers that are focused on youth in our community. They have a certain segment of the community that they're focused on serving.
About the DCR as well, do we have a place to put people? If we have a DCR and we want to involuntarily put people somewhere that are having issues, we have space?
Yeah, there's the bed availability has been a large problem, especially with the closing of Western State and Eastern State hospitals. But there are generally beds available. They may not be here in Mason County. They may be in Thurston.
And then do we have transport for them?
Yeah, we would need to transport.
And, okay, just, because I mean, if we bring that person in and we can't utilize them, then what?
I know the facility down the street here has 16 short-term beds and 16 long-term beds. Whether with the DCR in our community, we could prioritize with our partner that would implement that program people in our community that are experiencing crisis. It's something that we would have to work out with our partner.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yeah, so if we were to implement all of these simultaneously, we're looking at about $500,000.
Roughly.
And we're looking at about an ongoing cost of right around $400,000 if we take out the startup costs.
Mhm.
And that's if we're not even touching affordable housing policy, which at this point is incalculable. We don't know what that would look like. So I guess my question is, I see that there are time prioritization on these, but has the committee made any recommendations as far as prioritizing these by the value they feel these programs would bring to the community?
I think that's what the prioritization is. That's noted, the value that the homelessness task force places on each one. I think that the timelines are things that we are capable of doing as a city team with the resources that we currently have. So the mitigation site, if we are standing up a temporary, well, I shouldn't say temporary, if we're standing up a mitigation site, we can do the bare minimum necessary, providing water, providing sanitation facilities, providing a secure location for folks that want to use the facility. I think we can do that for about 35,000. That's the hard cost, but then you have the employee costs to staff it overnight, which is the larger number and is I think more difficult to implement. But that's kind of the way we looked at it. One of the reasons why affordable housing is last, because that's not something we can do immediately.
And when we talk about the struggles with staffing, I know that across the board, that's a challenge for folks right now. And even some of our nonprofit partners have shared that they've had open positions for months. So is there any interest or possibility of some of, like, for example, a mitigation site, having that be something that the city supports, but is actually operated by a nonprofit taking the lead on that? Might that be a better place to have that housed? Because that is not our area of expertise as a city staff. Was that part of the conversation, or is that something we could explore?
It was a little bit. So we talked about having a nonprofit partner potentially operate it during the daytime, but having a security guard, for lack of a better term, there in the evening would be our responsibility, I think.
I'll just say thank you to the committee and Jeff, Melanie, and others. Thank you very much for your time on this. I know you guys probably have better things to be working on days during the week, but this helps us guide a decision. And several of the items on here have been things that we have contemplated in the past and we've met resistance on, so this will be helpful in hopefully kicking some things past the goalpost this time. I will be very interested though in rules and policy around the mitigation site. I believe that's going to require a significant amount of time and effort thinking that one through. So it ultimately is successful, and it does have some sort of a follow-on solution, and not just in 7 months we shut it down and we're back to the drawing board again. And everything else on the list, I really see no challenge with, but again, thank you to the committee for helping bring this forward, and look forward to researching and understanding kind of the next steps here.
Do we as a city have a request for proposals for nonprofits to take on something like this?
Not yet. We didn't want to move forward with implementing this until we got the council's direction. So that's kind of what I wanted to get tonight, is head nods. Yes, we move forward on all of these. Yes, we move forward on 5 of the 7, that kind of thing. We want to make sure we take our direction after the recommendations have been provided. We want to make sure we take our direction from city council.
The storage locker versus shopping cart thing's a tough one. Because at that cost, I mean, $100K a year at a $200 average cost per cart, that's 500 carts a year we could give away for $100 grand.
Mhm.
I mean, that one's a hard one for me to really jump into for that level of cost. Because we're not saving money, we're not saving the store's money. I mean, there's not, so I don't know, that one seems a little outrageous.
It's something that you incorporate with the mitigation site itself. Where you can be creative on how you fund that. I mean, yeah, it might be expensive, but I think you can include that as part of the RFP for the mitigation site.
Yeah, but I mean, you still gotta come up with it. And that's,
Oh, we're putting, we have a wish list, right?
Yeah.
Put together a wish list to go, we need X, Y, Z
Well-
and AA and little B and 3C. You
I
know,
feel like
we
we're making
start-
more
Then
than-
it's our job to like start picking at it.
Yeah.
I'm sure Eric's really good at that.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're here doing right now, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, so I'm saying that let's not close that option and like, let's put it in a, let's be proactive about how we can make it happen instead of stopping it right away.
Gotcha.
I mean, let's throw out all our ideas and like, let's hammer them out.
That's what we're doing.
Okay, so but I
And
don't
I'm,
wanna,
and I'm telling you what I think.
okay, all right, well, I'm telling you, like, there's creative ways to do that, not let's
Well, what, like what?
put it as part of a different package and not just, it's silo it, you know? Yeah, yes, it's a cost, but it can be included in other ways. I mean, we can put it as part of our proposals for helping us in our grants. I mean, there's ways to put it, there's ways to do this. I mean,
That sounds like Chisholm Bob math, though. I'm just gonna move this over here.
well,
It's
that's
still the same cost. It's just we're gonna
that's
land.
what we do as government, is we help get money over here, move it over here.
Clarification, So perhaps I think I think maybe what you're intending to say, Miguel, is that maybe some of the hard costs, which the highest being the employees, hard boots on the ground, those might be one person serving multiple functions. Is that what you're saying? There's opportunities to save costs in that way? Or was there something else that you
So
were
you could integrate all
suggesting?
these, we've siloed all these different costs, like we could incorporate that into other areas and spread out the costs, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Because, you know, we've been asking for action for the past, 10 to 12 years on homelessness, and we finally have a list.
Mhm.
So let's do it. Let's get creative about it.
And
you know?
I appreciate that. I'd say from my point of view, none of this is budgeted in next year, so there's absolutely gonna have to be some creative conversations about how best to approach that.
Mhm.
I think obviously the second one, supporting grant applications, that doesn't cost us anything but our time and energy, and we should be doing that always. And I think the staff has proven that that's successful. The DCR is already well on its way, so I think we've got 2 of the top 3 already moving down the pipeline. It seems like the mitigation site being #1 recommendation from the committee would be the one I'm most interested in pursuing next. We maybe can't do everything all at once. But I think, of course, keeping, our eyes open for opportunities to be smart about our resources where we can. But realizing that at this moment in time, with the budget we've approved, none of this is set for 2023. So we have to be very thoughtful about what that looks like and how that is going to affect our core services that we have, we have an obligation to provide first and foremost to support the city to function.
Just saying, if we're gonna ask Santa Claus for a wish list, let's have a long list. Let's not just limit it to cookies and milk, let's have a big, long list. Let's have, let's have reindeer, let's have food for the reindeer. Let's put everything on our wish list, and then we'll decide. 6 months down the road in June, when we start talking about actually doing this, what are the little things we can take out? But let's just throw everything. I'm not gonna say this again, it's gonna be unpopular. There are people dying in the streets of exposure. And we need to start doing something that we haven't done in the past 8 years. And we need to get serious about it. We need to think about all the things that we need, not just what we want. And then we should think about stuff we want that makes it easier for us to complete our needs. So I'm just saying, let's put it out there. What do we need to solve homelessness? And then, okay, I guess we don't solve homelessness today, but at least we can get somebody in a bed tonight. That's probably what we're always doing. So let's at least do that. And let's think about how do we make it so that people would want to work at the homeless shelter? How do we make it so people would want to take a job at the jail so that we could have space in the jail? I mean, let's make a community and let's spend our money in the community well and think about all the things that even a lot of people in the room are talking about. Let's have pride in this community and let's do something about it. That's all I'm saying.
I think the mitigation site is the most important start. I think is where we probably need to go. As a community, we need to decide if we want them in parks or if we want them in a mitigation site. I've said that in every meeting that we had. Some of the other ideas are great. I agree. We don't have any budget for that right now. But I think we should start the mitigation site as soon as possible. And see how many people will actually move from the parks to the mitigation site. And then that gives us more options to. For enforcement.
Points well taken.
And the DCR, I'm sorry, is huge. I think mental illness is also a huge problem, and I think the DCR here is gonna be huge in Shelton.
All right. All good points. I don't really disagree with anybody. I think it's just the approach of how we take the next bite of this thing. Jeff, just to clarify, you're looking to hear from us what we want to do in terms of the next step, correct?
Yeah, so priorities obviously are yours. What I've heard so far is that the mitigation site is the number one thing that we should be working on.
I disagree with that.
Okay,
I think a DCR is a much more powerful tool on our tool belt than the mitigation site. I'm adamantly against the mitigation site. But mainly because I don't want to haphazardly go into it with very lackluster rules and just have another haven for people to be the side of the freeway over there in Olympia where people are pushed. I mean, it's there, it has to be really structured right. And
sure. Well,
I
and
just,
to
I don't want to just fly into it and throw up a chain link fence and say, here's a new camping spot.
So to be fair, if council is in favor of us moving forward to explore a mitigation site, we would develop all those rules along with the location. And then bring those back to council for approval. So this isn't like tonight.
Understood.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, I wasn't implying that, just more than that, though. I want it to be really tight. I'm just,
And I think there's some evidence of some cities who've done this that have had success. And so the good news is we're not figuring it out.
Yeah.
So there's lots of resources to figure out what went well and what.
but for me, that's not the number one. I think the
The
DCR
DCR.
is,
But we already have a fully funded DCR grant, so that is happening,
okay.
correct?
We'll announce that early next week.
Oh.
On the mitigation site, since we're just kind of talking about this at the moment, I mean, obviously it's a priority. It takes the next step of moving people towards services. I've heard those talking points, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. My concerns, though, is if there's not the supportive services to back that up, then we're hosting a campground, right? And then stuck with that until services come on par with our needs, right? And which again, today we need to have some more information. I think we need to talk more about that, and we need to talk about, because I think back to Veterans Village conversations and the barriers that were erected around that. And then here we are, right? So, I think we really could spend a lot of time talking about the mitigation site and where the mitigation site goes and what services that offers, where the lockers get put. I don't really care, but again, it's one of these things where I think this in and of itself is a significant undertaking, and Councilmember Peterson's point, I can't disagree with that at all. We didn't necessarily bake it into the 2023 budget, and we already know how tight that is. There's definitely things on that in our next year's budget that we have to accomplish. But again, I'm just trying to think of like the best way to approach this next step. But I think potentially bringing this committee back to help us develop the mitigation site concept for Shelton would be beneficial.
So I think, and Melanie can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection of the task force was that the mitigation site was always viewed as a step.
Right.
And that when we're viewing these recommendations, the mitigation site and the affordable housing were viewed as kind of two ends of the same coin.
Continue.
You have to, the housing continuum. We've all heard that language. Because if you don't provide affordable housing or the next step up, affordable workforce, housing onto market rate housing, all you'll end up with is an ever expanding mitigation site.
Right.
And that's not something that the task force wanted at all, which is why I think the affordable housing was a recommendation on the final in the final version. Melanie, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
that kind of runs in, I guess, my next question I had on my list was what are we considering affordable housing? Are we talking about affordable housing for sale, affordable housing for rent? A combination of the two?
Yes,
Yes,
And then what do we consider affordable housing?
it's generally at the Department of Housing and Urban Development considered 60 to 80% of area median income. And there's continuums, there's emergency shelter, transitional housing, which is something that the Veterans Village is intended to be. Then you have affordable or workforce housing, then you have market rate housing. So the idea is to get people into the emergency shelter and move along that continuum so that they stay housed, stay in shelter. And I think the numbers kind of back that up. The first quote here underneath the recommendations. Chronic homelessness costs the public $30,000 to $50,000 per unhoused individual. I know that those numbers have been shared in multiple public meetings with council, but it's from police officer time, from DCR time, from emergency room visits, and all the other things associated with it. It's more spread out, it's more diffuse, so people don't see the actual cost related to all those services. So that's where it's more effective to address it up front and provide these unhoused individuals with a roof so that they're not impacting our jails and our emergency rooms and everything else.
So let's go back here. What came first, the chicken or the egg? What comes first, the mitigation or the DCR?
Mhm.
I mean, if you don't have a mitigation DCR, what goes on there?
So the DCR is intended to address those folks with mental health issues that are currently experiencing mental health crisis and are a danger to themselves or others. The mitigation site isn't for those folks. It's for other people that are unhoused that are currently camping in various camps around our community. And we would be able to say, here's a safe place for you to go and camp, and you don't have to, worry about sleeping out in the woods. If you choose not to go, then we have a way to hold you accountable to that. So it's really what it is, and Deputy Mayor Schmidt mentioned this, the pushing people to services. It's like, here are your services, please take them. If you don't, we can't have you sleep in camps around the community. We just can't have that. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin.
What do we see the city's role in affordable housing?
So any number of ways, if we can find a public-private partnership where an affordable housing developer would come in and build affordable housing, workforce housing in our community on land that we currently own, that's certainly an opportunity for us to provide affordable housing. The other way is the ordinance that council will consider later on in the summer, more than likely, that subdivision ordinance that says 10% or 15 or 20, it doesn't, that's up for council's consideration. Of your new homes, if you have a 50 lot subdivision, you have to provide 10% of those 50 lots have to be affordable housing. And you sign a deed restriction that's held usually by the housing authority. We would have to work that out. So you couldn't turn around and sell that for market rate 2 years later. And that would be either for purchase or for rent. It's either one. Those are really the two ways that we can create affordable housing.
And with that, we're talking about implementing to where it's a mandatory thing. So we're going to stick them instead of carrot them.
Both. So I mentioned before, you have that component where you have to provide affordable housing, but you get a density bonus. So if the zoning allows you to do a 50 lot subdivision on the property you own, you can then build 55 lots, but 5 of those, if we use the 10% example, have to be affordable. So you're not necessarily gaining anything, you're not losing anything. we get affordable housing for our community.
And again, pointing to the housing continuum, I'm hopeful that we will continue to take the results from the housing summit report that came out. I mean, that wasn't done in 2019. I know some of the numbers have changed, but one of the big things that we saw come out of that was that the lack of workforce housing is causing our affordable housing inventory to be,
Oh, the inventory.
the inventory to go way down, the
Cost to
prices to
go
go way up, which is giving us less opportunity for folks to move into that next step. And so really keeping an eye on the entire continuum and not pigeonholing ourselves just into one specific solution.
Sure.
I wanted to congratulate the council for decreasing our lot sizes to increase the housing in the future. I think that's something we should do more in the future. We should talk more about density as well. We do have an urban growth area that we're restricted to be within.
Mhm.
So why not have more loosen the restrictions on lots of sizes of lots. So that we can have more housing.
Yeah, another thing the council has done that directly affects this issue is allow accessory dwelling units. You know, council did that earlier this year, which will increase housing supply. And hopefully affordable housing or affordable prices will come along with that.
This is part of, I want to nod to everything that we're doing here. This is part of a holistic approach to ending homelessness. We're not going to end homelessness, but how can we get more people in beds tonight?
Mhm.
Right, so, or next year. So I think we're working in the right direction, but just saying, oh, I decreased lot sizes, I saw homelessness, that's not sufficient.
So with affordable housing, it's a wonderful concept, but somebody still has to pay for it.
Mhm.
And so when you ask these people, why are you homeless? Some of them it's mental illness and they can't always hold down a job. So somebody still has to pay for those beds. And then also some of them they don't have the skills to hold a job.
Mhm.
So how do we get them those skills? So we have a mitigation site. Do we teach them skills so that they can have a job, so they can move up to affordable housing? There's a whole gamut of stuff we're missing here.
I don't think we're missing it. I think that, as I mentioned in the mitigation site, it's kind of temporary, and what we would like to do, or what kind of the vision I developed out of the homelessness task force and just research that I've done
Mhm.
is turning it into a brick and mortar building,
Right.
but having services there, job skills. We can work with our workforce development partners. We have a doctor come in once a month. We have a dentist come in once a month, a barber. Into those places, teaching them job skills, but also having program specialists that are on site that will do that. But that's not something that we can do in next year or even 2 years from now.
If you're interested in reading, the Swinomish tribe has a
Mhm.
great model
Mhm.
in reading about that and the wraparound services and what they've
Right.
done in their
Yeah.
community.
But you have to give them a way to be able to pay for that affordable housing,
Absolutely.
right?
Right. Do you have what you need, sir?
So what I've heard is either the DCR and or the mitigation side are 1A and 1B, basically, from council. The support for grant applications, absolutely. We have been doing that. We'll continue to do that. The storage lockers, I don't have a firm direction on, but I think that we can look at that as maybe a component of the mitigation site, since the recommendation was for it to be co-located, and then it can be, modular, if we have the mitigation site, and then that can be a separate conversation as part of that overall one. The public dashboard. Is that something, and just head nods on that, is that something that council would like to see us explore further?
Just need some more information on that and kind of questioning what the point would be for the public to
Right.
know what shelter beds are available versus like our cops, fire department
Sure.
and stuff, right? Because they're the ones who are gonna have to interact, the service providers and responders, but
Well, it
I
could
mean, I
be
don't
as
know.
simple as a Facebook page. It could be a free tool that's very easy and can be updated
Sure.
in real time.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't really have cost other than whoever's responsible for putting down how many shelter beds says we have 6 shelter beds.
We won't be using Facebook, but I get your point. And then support for affordable housing. I think that developing concrete plans as part of the comprehensive plan update, we can include a housing whatever I called it in here, the housing policies as part of the comprehensive plan update. I think that we can do that without a problem, and that's part of that larger overall program of the comprehensive plan update. So, and we can bring those specific policies to you and things that have worked in other places. So I think I have firm direction on that. If that's something that council is comfortable with, we'll move forward in taking those steps. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Our next discussion is about various no sit, no lie ordinances. Jeff has more information for it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members. So earlier this year, it was requested that we investigate and research no sit, no lie ordinances in the country and in Washington State in particular. So we looked at, and I provided you with 4 ordinances from various parts of the state that are representative of the approaches that various communities around the state have looked at. We looked at the city of Aberdeen, the city of Everett, the city of Monroe, and the city of Spokane, which is the most recent one. All those ordinances have pretty much the same things in common. Most are time bound, so they're only from, say, 6 a.m. to midnight. In one case, I think it's 6 a.m. to 2. Most are focused only on a specific geographic area, except the city of Monroe, but they're limited by within 100 feet of a public doorway or driveway, not a specific geographic area. Again, provided all those to you along with an analysis of each in the memo. Similar, one of the things I wanted to highlight the similarities and differences between the two. Ordinances require that a law enforcement officer must notify the individual and may only issue a citation if the individual refuses to comply. Spokane also includes their intent, and that is that Spokane's ordinance that they just adopted in October of this year. That homeless individuals subject to enforcement under this section be directed to emergency shelters, community drug mental health court, or other interventional services. So their purpose again is nod to that talking point, push people to services. The ordinances have been adopted at various times. I think the earliest one was 2018 with the city of Monroe over the last several years, but all of them are only directed at public sidewalks, except the city of Monroe, which broadens it a little bit to public rights of way. So that would be sidewalks, but also streets and alleyways and those types of things. None of them address public or private property that are not sidewalks. So Everett is the one that is all day long, but they're limited to a very specific geographic area. And the Monroe ordinance and the Spokane ordinance follow the basic outlines of the Boise decision, which is if there are no shelter beds available, this ordinance cannot be enforced. Finally, all of them are also, with the exception of Aberdeen, which is curious to me that they didn't call out a specific penalty in their ordinance. All the other ones called it out. They said that it's either a $500 or a $1,000 fine and punishable by 90 days in jail in most cases. And we've had the jail discussion previously with this council about any number of topics. And we're working on solving that. But that's kind of how they've framed it. Happy to go over anything in this memo or anything in the ordinances that I provided to you from these various municipalities or any other questions that you have.
All these ordinances, you still need shelter beds, correct?
Spokane and Monroe, yes. And in the case of Monroe, if there's a shelter bed within 15 miles, the officer is required to transport the individual to that bed. The other two don't mention the shelter component and how that works in actual on the ground operation. I'm not sure.
Would the mitigation side work for beds?
Yes.
I just to highlight, like with Spokane, when I was doing my research on this, they just built a new facility.
Mhm.
And they already had underutilized shelter space.
Yep.
We're not in that predicament here, so. Nice to be in that predicament where we have more than enough space, but. And I believe in Everett. That was not enforced, it's not enforced until they establish their pallet shelter facility and some other stuff too. I know, I think almost every other location, it was the same. It's not enforceable, just like our public camping and everything else, it's just not enforceable until we have a shelter.
And that may very well be the case in Everett. The only two that specifically call it out are Monroe and Spokane. But it wouldn't surprise me because the Boise decision is relatively clear. I mean, there's not a whole lot of ambiguity there. There's some, but not a whole lot.
More comments or questions?
Okay, so is there any direction from council on what you would like to see done with this particular approach?
Well,
I would like to hold off until we have a mitigation site, we can have a decision whether we can or not.
Yeah.
In the first place.
Okay.
So if we have a mitigation site, then this is on the table.
Mhm.
I don't think this is on the table if we don't have a mitigation site.
right.
I mean, we still have a shelter. It's tough though, because it's, do we make rules? Before we have a way to punish people, or do we have to have a way to punish people before we make rules? And it just adds more rules. And it's tough because I feel like a lot of people emotionally encompass homelessness as just this universal thing. Where it's just like society, we have our outliers, we have our people that get drunk and drive, we have our people that steal. They're still just, they might have a home, but it doesn't mean they're following rules and staying within these guidelines. These just give us something to kind of start working towards and with, hey, you're not allowed to lay on the sidewalk and set up camp here. Can we enforce it? No, but we can still give a citation. We can still start working things towards that way. So one day when we can actually punish people, this person has 72 citations. This person, and some of these do have a 90-day in jail, which we are going to have jail space soon. This isn't for the lady with 2 children that's sleeping outside of Walmart in her car. This is for the person who's downtown being disruptive. And that's where encompassing it all in one and just saying that this is just to keep homeless people off the street isn't the intent. It's not the spirit of this ordinance. So.
And I'd be interested in revisiting this a little bit down the line. I also realized that our staff has quite a hefty list from us already for 2023. And it's not to say this isn't something we should be looking at, but I think for me, this is something to revisit at a later date. But I appreciate having this kind of framework to start thinking how that best works.
I was just putting it on the Christmas list.
There you go.
I would agree that we probably should hold off on this until we have facility in place so we can actually and also jail beds
Mhm.
to be able to enforce it. Otherwise, it's just giving multiple tickets to somebody who can't afford, anything else. Well,
But would this be across the board for anybody sitting or lying? Or would it be somebody that's disrupting the community?
Yeah, the police would have to enforce this the same way for everybody.
But if a cop asks you to move along because this is a no-sit lie zone, you're gonna probably move along.
So and I think I've run this past Jeff too. My scenario is that I'm visiting this town and I have 2 little children. And it's a beautiful day and I see a bench on a sidewalk and I sit down. We sit there for quite a while. Do I get moved on?
No, because it's not after the time frame, unless you're out there after midnight. Or whatever the time frame is that it sets, which most of these have designated time frames. It's more of, so. Go ahead and do some of the reading on it and it'll explain a lot of it to you. There's quite a bit, like you said, there's.
I think sitting on a park bench is way different than me having to step over you to get to my job in the sidewalk, you know what I mean? There's a very big difference there.
Okay.
And it's for their safety too. You're feeling pretty safe sitting on a park bench, right? But if you're on a sidewalk or near the side of the road, that's not safe for that individual either.
Okay.
Does the Parks Board have any engagement with this, the SMPD? Start talking about this, 'cause I'm assuming it would be something we'd have to entertain covering a park. City
Well,
park.
and that's the thing. I was kind of surprised when they started doing the research on this. None of this applies to parks.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
Or bus stops.
or bus stops.
oh, okay, so that's,
So,
yeah, let's,
yeah, I was kind of surprised. I thought these ordinances would be broader in terms of public property. But they're not. They're all only focused on sidewalks, except what? Monroe that says rights, I think it's Monroe that says rights of way, but it's, I mean, basically the same thing.
And we don't have quite the same sidewalk issue some places do. I mean, you go to some places and the sidewalks are unusable. Yeah, so I mean, to me, this is just a cheap. to implement. This isn't $100,000 a year to put into place.
So what I've heard is when we have a way to hold people accountable, the council would like to revisit this. Okay. And that's all I have. Happy to answer any other questions if you have them.
All right, and yes,
House Bill 1590. The 1/10 of 1% affordable housing sales tax.
Oh,
that was-
from
that
several
was
years ago.
passed A few years ago that allowed councilmanic approval of that.
Mhm.
Have you heard anything from any other cities on the adoption of that? Because we obviously identified a funding gap.
Right.
And this is a potential mechanism to plug that hole.
So
Have you heard anything from other cities or?
yeah, so if I remember correctly, and I'll do some research on this and share it with council, but we entered into a memorandum of understanding with Mason County. Where Mason County would collect those funds as long as the amount that the city would have collected is spent within the city of Shelton. I believe that's the correct ordinance, but I will double check that and get that to you. But as far as I know right now that we are collecting there, Mason County is collecting that and spending it on our behalf within the city.
yeah, it's about $17,000 per year. It's not very much, and then they did use some of it for this housing needs assessment
Yes.
that the county did. They used some more funds for that. So,
All right.
all right, any other questions? All right. Council have any new items for discussion? All right, well then, this study session is adjourned at 7:02 PM.
Thanks.